Hello everyone. Today we are talking about the different forms of poetry, or these different forms include ballad, elegy, epic, ghazal, haiku, lyric, ode, and sonnet. Ballad. It's a very popular form of poems. It's a narrative poem. It was originally meant to be sung. It consists of four-line stanzas, but there is alternative rhyme scheme, and it is often sung or recited as a folk tale. Uh, Ballads were a major part of the oral tradition. Literature exists in oral tradition, and ballads were the major parts. Ballads are generally about ordinary people who have unusual adventures, but with a single tragic incident as central focus. There are no more adventures, but there is only single incident that is highlighted here. The ballad tells more of a story than a poem does. It's a narrative form of poetry. Between two types of ballad, so it means there are two types of ballad. Between two types of ballad, folk ballad is a narrative song that has been transmitted orally. Folk ballad has been transmitted orally. On the other hand, literary ballad is a conscious imitation without music. In ballad, there is a pattern, and there is alternative rhyme pattern, and there is narration and musicality within. Let's say the sound of poetry consists a lot in ballad, and in the ballad, literary ballad especially, there is a conscious imitation without music of such work, often with complex symbolism. Complex symbolism is one part of literary ballad. Lyrical ballads were published in 1798, and this ballad is also popular with this name. Before that, or even after that, even today, ballads are in existence. They are major forms of poetry. After discussing about ballad, let's talk about elegy. Elegy is a form of poetry in which the poet or speaker laments, expressing the grief, sadness, or loss. There is a mourning element in elegy. The speaker has a great loss, and he or she is mourning upon that because there is a kind of loss. The loss is reflected in the poet's expression here, and the elegy has come to mean a poem of mourning for an individual or a lament for some tragic event. They are written on the themes of death, war, love, and losses of something valuable. English literature is especially rich in this kind of poetry. Thomas Gray's Elegy, written in a country churchyard, is one of the most popular elegies in English, which laments the passing of way of life. Among other elegies written here, Lycidas by John Milton, Adonais by P.B. Shelley, In Memoriam by Alfred Lord Tennyson, and so on. When we discuss about epic, we know about long narration and brave warriors fighting, heroic material in elevated style, grand skill about deeds of warriors and heroes, incorporating myth, legend, and folktale along with history. All these come together. It means epic is a grand form of poetry. It's a long narrative poem. For example, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the Paradise Lost, Odyssey, Iliad. Basically, there are two kinds of epic. Primary epic, that is based on oral tradition or primitive subject matters. Another is secondary, that is literary epic. The first belongs to the oral tradition and thus is composed orally and recited, that exists in oral tradition, oral form of poetry. That long stories, long poems, long narratives, in long narratives in the form poetry, they exist in read oral forms. Only much later, in some cases, it is written down. The second is written down at the starts. The second category is literary category. The first category is primary or oral category. And these two categories, second is written down at the start. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, Gilgamesh and Beowulf of unknown authors belong to primary category. Virgil's Aeneid, Milton's Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained belong to secondary category. So do the Mahabharata of Ved Vyas and Valmiki's the Ramayana. Ultimately, epic aspires to grandeur and no common sort. To a start where men transcend their human limitations and for a time at last, and for a time at least, become more obviously in the image of godlike creatures, semi-divine. Divine creatures are also involved in such narratives. Spenser's The Faerie Queene was the greatest narrative poem in the 16th century English literature. He wanted to complete it as an epic. Had he lived a long life, he could have completed this big book and it could have been the longest epic in English, but he could not finish and it remained incomplete. This Faerie Queene was the greatest narrative poem in the 16th century English literature, and still today it's a text, it's a poetic work to be taught and discussed among the students in the universities. The heroic tradition of primary epic still exists. That means oral tradition exists. It is a mixture of epic and tradition. So another form here is ghazal and haiku, and this is not the tradition of English poetry actually, but it's a form of poetry. Ghazal is a form of poetry which has its roots in 7th century Arabia. It has been adapted into several languages such as Urdu, Hindi, Persian, and English. Similarly, it is composed of 5 to 15 structurally and thematically autonomous couplets. The recurring theme in a ghazal is unconditional love. So, ghazal, when we talk about ghazal, we remember about the theme of love, and that is unconditional. Another form of poetry here we need to discuss is haiku. It's a form of poetry that originated in Japan. It is traditionally composed of 3 lines with 17 syllables written in a 575 syllable count. Means 17 syllables, especially 3 lines. Uh, it often focuses on images from nature. It is a short form of Japanese poetry in 3 phrases, typically characterized by 3 qualities. It's a Japanese form of poetry. Haiku, ghazal is Arabian form of poetry. So poems are not only confined to English base alone. They have been brought from different traditions and they have become very prominent forms of poetry in the literature. Lyric. Lyric is a short poem expressing the thoughts and feelings of a single speaker. It's a non narrative poem, but it contains song like qualities that expresses the speaker's personal emotions and feelings. The lyric is usually fairly short, not often longer than 50 or 60 lines, and often only between a dozen and 30 lines, and it usually expresses the feelings and thoughts of a single speaker, not necessarily the poet himself. There can be a persona in a personal and subjective fashion. The lyric poem, usually short, was often constructed on a single mood. There is no divergence mode, single mode. From the time of Aristotle, from the time of Aristotle, Greek, till the date, lyric as a popular short poetic form keeps with elements of melody. Ballad also survives with the lyric in lyrical ballads. Sometimes these two genres of poetry, these two forms of poetry merge together to make a new form, and that is hybrid form as we talk about lyrical ballads. Lyric was sung in accompaniment of lyre in single mood and single theme. And actually, a lyric is very popular form of poetry till the date. Another form of poetry that we talk about is another lyric. This is another lyric, but it is a long and serious one on a stated theme, as in John Keats' Ode on a Grecian Urn, P.B. Shelley's To a Skylark, similar poems. Uh, it's a lyric accompanied by music addressed to an event, a person or a thing not present. It exalts someone, for instance, a hero, or something, for instance, a season, and glorifies it. Since the themes of words are inspiring and lofty, they have universal appeal. A form of lyrical poetry, word is characterized by its uniform metrical fit. When we talk about musical elements or sound of poetry, there is uniform metrical fit, but poets generally do not strictly follow this rule, though they use highly elevated theme. Words are of three types: Pindar ode from Greek, Horatian ode from Italy or Rome, and irregular form, especially English and other forms here. And Wordsworth, Coleridge, Keats, Tennyson, W.H. Auden are some of the popular word writers. This elevated or exalted form of lyrical poetry uh, is different from other forms, but there is lyrical elements. There is address to an event, person, or thing, which may not be present there, and it glorifies the hero and exalts the season, and there is single metrical fit. That's in word. And another form of poetry we talk about here is sonnet. Sonnet, it's a 14-line lyrical poem. It has a single theme, and there is certain intricate rhyming scheme. And here, the poet addresses his or her thoughts and feelings with a single theme, as I mentioned earlier. It was popularized by Italian poet Francesco Petrarch in the 14th century. In his sonnet, that 14 lines are divided into two parts, eight parts, two parts. The first eight lines called the octave or octet, and latter 6 lines called the sestet. And between 8 lines and 6 lines, there is a gap, wide gap in the page. That's called turn, okay, or volta. The first 8 lines state the problem, and the latter 6 line brings the solution. The rhyming scheme is usually ABBA, ABBA, CDC, CDC. English poet Edmund Spenser wrote sonnets, and his sonnets are called Spenserian sonnets. Actually, Edmund Spenser was not the person who first practiced sonnet writing in England. Uh, Sir Henry Howard and Olaf Surrey, they practiced sonnet writing. They translated Italian sonnets and they brought the writing of sonnet in English literature, and that was practiced by Spencer, uh, Shakespeare, Milton, Wordsworth, even W. Beers. So many writers have written sonnets, and especially English sonnet is known as Shakespearean sonnet. Milton also wrote sonnet. He followed Italian pattern, but he used a variety of themes, and his sonnet are called Miltonic sonnets.